Hi, everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discuss today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts about this podcast. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, a very busy Lei this morning.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. This is Lei Xing, your co-host, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 144. More numbers are out. We've heard NIO on their earnings, more activities over there. There's IRA stuff that's making it more clear, or not.
Clear as mud.
That's what I thought. What else?
This rumor that Tesla's trying to double their capacity at Shanghai Giga.
Yeah, the 25, Plant 3 and $25,000.
Well, let's start with NIO earnings. So they shipped a little over 55,000 cars in Q3, better revenues, better gross margins. But what do you think?
It was a great quarter, relatively speaking. They're still losing shitload of money, but they lost less than they did in Q2. So I think everything was looking up. And I thought this was probably, since their IPO, one of the earnings calls, I thought with one of the most minute details.
Yeah.
As detailed as how many sales associates they hired over the last 1 and 2 months. And as detailed as telling you or informing the investors that this is probably something that's both good and bad. That they have 50% of their shares coming out of 3 regions in China. So that shows you how much more potential there is outside of those regions.
Well, it honestly, it points back to the reason they're adding sales associates.
Yeah, right. So they're all connected, right? William said there's 2 things that's kind of the bottleneck or hindering. Is first of all, this premium user psych, and second, because they still don't think they have enough power swap network. Against those 3 regions, right? The 700 stations, that's a third of what they have.
Right.
In all of China. It just went over 2,200 yesterday, right? And I thought it was clear what William said was what they want to do and what they do not want to do. And the battery, being one example he shared, right? They'll continue to develop cells, materials, but they'll have to subcontract it out.
Yeah.
Instead of making it on their own, which is the BF1 that's inside F2, and they just don't have the money for it. That's plain and simple.
So in on one hand, they're acquiring assets. On the other hand, they're still trying to outsource certain operations. So it's a delicate balance. And so they already have all this capital tied up into the facilities, right? So
yeah, and they hired about the same number of people as they let go, although they're not the same type of employees, but
titles are different, roles and responsibilities are different.
Right, the 3,000 are all sales, while the other ones are probably related to the business that they don't see making money in anytime soon, right?
And you and I think it's important to point back to you and I both, I think, agreeing that they were doing a lot and were likely pretty spread pretty thin. And I think this really validates what we were talking about because they lost some employees on the phone stuff. They lost some employees on non-essential business growth opportunities. And so they're doubling down on people, but are really focusing on a handful of things instead of 10 or 12 things.
And so the question mark is, are those 3,000 and 5,700 whatever that they shared? Are they going to translate to sales? Is that a direct relationship? I don't know.
And one of the things that I don't get a real clear vision of is their app gets 500,600,000, I think, a monthly average users. So what are they doing to convert those who have not, those users on the app that have not purchased a NIO? Because you think that that would be their easiest path to sales growth.
Right. That hasn't, translated to results. And there are probably many, I don't know if you are on there, I'm on there, but just as a pure outsider, right?
I downloaded it, but I haven't used
Yeah.
it as.
Sometimes, that's where actually you get information because William and Li Hong, they post on there, right? They
Right.
answer people's questions. Sometimes they reveal stuff.
But let's dig into this a little bit, Lei, because I feel that it's a positive to be associated with NIO, but not enough to commit 400,000, 500,000 RMB yet. And that's that gap that I don't know sales associates really are going to help bridge. So unless they have a lot of data that they're building and executing on in order to close that gap. So,
Right.
but again, they talk around the issue, the important issue to me, because they already have captured a decent number of potential buyers within their ecosystem. And to me, that's easier in theory, because this is not happening for NIO, not on paper anyways. In theory, it would be easier to convert them than a random person off the street, I would think.
And then in a longer term, right? So these the Chang'an Geely battery alliance, the F1 and F2 assets that they just recently purchased. These are what I call the distant water, right? And the present thirst is basically margins and getting that sales, which I think normal expectations would put it at 20,000 to 30,000 a month by now, and they're not there yet. And so
let me piggyback off that 20 to 30,000 based on the number of products they have in the market, the number of swapping stations they have in the market. Because I don't know, maybe the data they see points to not enough swapping stations, but I think there's enough for the volume that they're selling per quarter.
Right. So speaking of the swap stations, so going forward, they have to continue to build out these NIO user dedicated Gen 3, maybe Gen 4 is coming up, power stations. At the same time in 2024, build out the other ALPS, standardized battery shared swap network with the other partners.
Now we get into some redundancy.
Yeah.
Because is it just a different skin on the swapping station, or are there really major technical differences that make a NIO swapping station very unique versus an Alps, or in the future a potential Avatar swapping station or Geely swapping station? Because
Yeah.
we know that in the automotive space, economies of scale ultimately wins, because that's why BYD is winning. That's why Tesla is winning, because they're able to get 60, 70, 80,000 units a month via production. So I'm talking Tesla, because BYD is much higher than that, right? So
yeah, and it looks like the business model is that NIO is kind of the station hardware provider
yeah,
also, right? So they'll buy these and then somehow they'll have these because they want to set up these joint venture, asset management companies with the partners, right? So they'll utilize what NIO's cloud network, and right. We talked about this balancing act a couple episodes ago.
and I think it's important to also say that this is an expense that they bear that the other EV makers do not.
Yeah.
Because the uniqueness of the swapping station. So the revenues generated, the additional revenues and the additional investment from Geely and Chang'an and potentially JAC can't come soon enough to offset some of the
Yeah.
expenses that up
Yeah.
until now,
Yeah.
NIO has been taking on themselves.
Yeah. And the whatever that's coming out on NIO Day.
Yeah, let's switch to that.
Well, it's definitely going to be a 9.
It's a
The only-
Halo.
the only question is which 9 it is.
Yeah.
And I heard that this is going to have like a 900 volt platform.
Wow. You and I were just in LA. I think it's probably going to be something like a Gravity.
Gravity, or
That's my guess. Like an MPV massive crossover, because I don't think it's going to be this Defender competitor, super rugged. I think it's going to be very Halo-ish.
I was thinking along the lines of the FF91.
Exactly. But hopefully, well, I don't think it'll come in at $275,000.
Well, I heard it's going to be a million renminbi type of vehicle. Like I don't know. They want to get up to the Maybachs, the Bentleys,
which doesn't move the needle
No.
for them on a sales standpoint.
I think it's more of a technological prowess, showing what they plan to do with the next NT3 platform.
I also think they're trying to pull up the NIO brand in order to separate from Alps and the other brand.
Yeah.
A little bit further, give it a little more distance.
Yeah. But then looking ahead to Q4, we already know that it's going to be another roller coaster. The deliveries are down Q on Q, as well as revenues, but they want to stick with that 15% margin, which I think for them it's already pretty good. I mean, considering the situation that they're in, maintaining that kind of, and they want to get it to over 20% in the long term.
Yeah, I feel that by mid 24, if they're not selling 80, 90,000 cars a quarter, their strategy that they're trying to implement in the coming months is not effective.
Yeah, so that's why I think next year, 2024, is really quite crucial. I mean, there's really no new products.
No new products, but you can believe that there will be likely major refreshes.
Well, I mean, probably not even major refreshes. I mean, minor tweaks here and there, maybe.
I think there have to be major refreshes because
they just refreshed the NT 2.0, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
But if we think about it, Lei, Geely Galaxy's coming on, BYD, the Fangchongbao and the Yangwang, they're really going to start ramping. And the Lotus, the Polestar, and the Volvo is really going to start being a major premium choice for the Chinese consumer. And so it doesn't get any easier. One of the things that William Li did not mention about the challenges was that the price war is still going on, and that the premium segment has over the last 6 months, 7 months, it's gotten really crowded. And so NIO not only has to kind of reframe their strategy, they have to do it in a much more crowded space.
And then launching the Alps into the 200,000, 300,000 range is, I mean, what happened to Jiyue, right? I mean, work is cut out, basically.
And then, because Xiaomi's coming on next year. So, and then, well, not even that. It's just BYD just dominates that space.
So the Xiaomi SU7 is supposed to be debuting, I heard it, by year end.
Well, we've seen some pictures of it, right? So
there's this like dozen new cars that are being launched or starting pre-sale by year end.
I also think that, and this is a sneak peek into our look into 2024, the wheels will start to fall off of a couple of companies that we've talked about throughout this year, I think. So, but let me add a couple things here. November, 841,000 NEV sold.
Record?
Tesla sold,
40%?
40% take rate, yes. The envy of the United States, and I think, because the United States, I think, is probably going to be around 8 or 10% take rate. Tesla had about 8% of that share. They sold 82,000, and shipped about 65,000 of those to the China market. 16,000 were shipped abroad, mostly to Europe. And the other notable thing for November is that 1 of every 3 NEVs sold was a PHEV. So that's a big number. I think that PHEVs will steal a little bit more thunder from the BEVs in 2024. And BYD's like, either way, we're so what else did
The
you want to talk
Stellantis
about?
ample, right? Yeah,
Okay.
I mean that's
Yeah.
another. NIO should
Let me
be
summarize.
happy about it, right? I mean,
Yeah, I think that, I'd written in the newsletter that swapping is contagious. So for those that are wondering what Lei and I are talking about, there is a battery swapping startup in San Francisco called Ample, AMPLE. And till now, they have had challenges convincing legacy OEMs to join their platform. But there was an announcement yesterday or 2 days ago where Ample and Stellantis are going to be partnering in Spain for fleet vehicles on Stellantis's free to move car sharing platform. The idea would be there will be 100 Fiat E's, Fiat 500 E's that will be converted to battery swapping. And free to move, for those that aren't familiar, you can rent or lease a car for an hour, or you can lease it for several months. And the idea would be this creates more flexibility because now the utilization of that vehicle is much higher because you'll be 100% charged after a 5-minute swap versus hours and hours potentially per week in recharging if you plug it in. So to me, because right when that announcement got made, I got pinged by like 3 or 4 people. So my thoughts, Lei, and let's listen to yours after. Symbolic, huge symbolic win, and because 100 vehicles is nothing.
yeah.
But Stellantis sold 6.2 million cars last year. I'm not saying they'll convert every single one of those to swapping, but that's the potential. That's the TAM. That's the total addressable market. Having a legacy automaker endorse your technology is a huge, huge win for Ample.
I mean, Stellantis, right? Who else but Stellantis? Having gone with Leapmotor, having reached that CATL agreement, right? They've been on a Tavares has been on a tear.
Yes, tear.
In terms of getting into these unorthodox, not what you expected partnerships. So that's one. And the other one, I think the reason why this is happening in Europe first, I think, is also because of the local, let's say this is already happening, battery swapping in Europe. And I'm speaking of XEV with their Yo-Yo Smarter-like 2-door EVs that are battery swappable, except the huge asterisk is that these are manually swapped batteries. So 3 of them in the back of the car. You have to have a special person to take them out because they're heavy. And this is happening in Italy, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's that kind of ecosystem there already.
It's for those that are familiar with Gogoro, it's the same concept where
yeah, and then that's all over the place in China, right? With the scooters, and you just pop it in and take it out, right? So yeah,
I think that we're seeing examples, and I jumped on my soapbox in the newsletter and I said this is something that the United States should really, really look into. And I think that NIO, I compared the NIO partnerships with Chang'an and Geely a little bit differently than Stellantis, because Stellantis is a global manufacturer, number one. Number two, volumes are much higher, sales volumes from Stellantis. Combined, Geely and Chang'an are about 4 million, with most of that being in China. So Ample, I think, creates a bit more opportunity for themselves by partnering with Stellantis. And both very notable, but Ample, it should be noted, is a battery swapping startup. It doesn't build vehicles. Now, they're likely going to work with Stellantis on creating that standard, but could you imagine Leapmotor, let's say in 18 months, working with Ample for the European market on their BEVs, not their e-revs, on their BEVs to create a Leap motor a swappable EV. That would be pretty wild, wouldn't it?
Well, depending on whether they want to move into from the fleet into the private purchase, individual
Yeah.
customers. So now they're starting as a fleet-based swapping, let's say a trial, and then they'll go from there. But it looks like it's only focused on the fleet for now.
Yeah, and you make an important distinction because in order for Stellantis to grow this free to move, because there are a growing number of younger people, mostly younger people, that have no interest in vehicle ownership. A lot of them live in the cities. They don't have a place to park the vehicle. Living in the cities is already expensive. So to have that flexibility is a big thing and a huge constraint, I think, for potential users of free to move was that, well, I don't have anywhere to charge it. And so this eliminates one of the potential barriers for using free to move as a service.
Yeah, and also because of the size of these typical European cities, the congested space. That's why you're going to have these smaller vehicles happening first, using the 500e and then the XEV, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to see a huge, let's say, a NIO being put on this free to move platform.
Yeah. So I could see in a 10-year time frame a few different standards and the swapping stations becoming a bit more robust, able to manage 2-3 different sizes of batteries depending on the vehicle, and then you having a choice or an option to say, okay, I'm only a city car, I only need the small battery. And then let's say, for instance, I'm a city car, but I'm doing a long road trip. So I use the same size battery that has a longer range. So that swapping is not a kind of single use, single item thing. It gives you options. It gives you choices. So that's where an Ample and the NIO swapping station would really, really create some opportunities for itself to grow.
The other difference is it's something called the modular battery swapping, and I take it to mean a little bit different from NIO, is that they said they don't need to mess with the existing architecture or chassis. Maybe it's a simpler form of swapping than NIO, so that's probably another reason why Stellantis is taking on. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know the technical details, but it looks like it's a bit simpler than NIO's mechanism.
The other thing that I'd written about, Lei, was that with the Inflation Reduction Act revised, or I won't say revised language, I would say more focused language, we're likely going to see a decent amount of overcapacity in the next 5 years for LFP batteries. And one of the constraints for swapping is also the cost of building an inventory of batteries and where they'll sit financially on someone's books. Now, if LFP batteries become commoditized, that becomes less of an issue. And I know for a fact within the next 10 years, because China with CATL, BYD, and CALB and Envision, Goshen, they're building a ton of capacity in China, a ton of capacity, a lot that we likely don't know about. And so if the United States and Europe also starts, and a few of these facilities, Lei, you and I have talked about in the past, the Goshen factory in Michigan, the CATL Ford factory, some of these factories, the Envision ASC in the CALB in South Carolina. And so we're building out capacity here. There's going to be more capacity in Mexico likely and Canada. And so that's going to drive down rare earth metal pricing. It's going to drive down battery module pricing. So swapping, I feel, in the United States, especially because our use cases are such that, Lei, you probably have neighbors that have these big SUVs that sometimes they haul their trailer, they haul their workload. And so it's really impractical to, even if you have level 3 fast charging, it's still 15-20 minutes every 4 or 5 hours. Whereas it's 5 minutes in a NIO swapping station. So the United States should really take a long, hard look And, I didn't know if Apple was right for the US market, but I'm starting to kind of evolve my way of thinking about this. So,
I mean, Apple is focused on fleets again, right? For now.
yeah, for now. That's the easiest path for them, right?
In the big cities, I think it's viable for the ride hailing fleets. But so IRA, so this is when we got off last week. This new language,
It just
just
dropped.
dropped.
It just dropped.
I said in one of the chat group that is this a truce in the sense that the FEOC for critical minerals do not kick in until 2025. So, I mean, they had that table, right, in one of the documents that to receive $7,500, there's the FEOC on battery components that's required, but not on the critical materials in 2024. And then the 60% on the components requirement and the 50% on the minerals. So we're already seeing repercussions of Tesla not getting the full in 2024, the Mach-E not
getting nothing.
Nothing, not anything. Even though it's a North American made, right? So it's still confusing, but
they can move forward.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, the Marshall facility, I think that's shielded from this new language, from what I've right, because the assets is owned by Ford. So I mean, right, there's still these loopholes that I think that's why Joe Manchin wasn't happy, right?
I think that so there's a few different things going on. And I think that the urgency that I saw has kind of gone away a little bit because of the sudden loss in sales momentum of electric vehicles. And I should point out that GM said that most of their vehicles should be eligible for the tax credits starting in 2024, which is important because they have an Equinox, they have a Blazer, they're still going to be building the Bolt, although volumes are a little bit lower. But so if hybrids in the United States take a third of sales from EVs, then batteries and capacity and local capacity becomes less important, at least ramping in 2024, so that when 2025 kicks in and the constraints are even a little bit higher, then it's not as important, right? So,
I mean, just from a consumer point of view, the point of sale rebate is great, right? But
yeah,
you have less number of choices that'll get the full $7,500 credit or the savings. So this, I mean, in terms of affordability, in terms of getting that take rate up, this does nothing to help drive adoption. I think that's a kind of conundrum that we're like, yeah, this is good for America, but how?
But I think that the US3, the Biden administration were way overestimating the ability to design, engineer, manufacture affordable EVs in the short term. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act is a decade and a half long process. And so is it okay that the US doesn't get to 40% by 2030? I think so, especially if the rare earth metals get reshored or are finally sourced from friendly countries or whatever, right? Free trade partners or whatever that term is, countries of concern or something like that.
FEOC, foreign entity of concern.
Yeah.
And also the 25%, what do you call it? In anything, the government that owns 25% or more, right?
Yeah.
Those specific language, it's also interesting. Yeah.
Oh, that's specifically directed at China.
Well, and 3 other countries, right? So China is
but it's basically China specifically. But if we look at it from the lens of I'm a startup or I'm a new company in this space, that creates a lot of opportunity. Or I'm American. Let me specify that. I'm American. But I think the wild card is, so I should press rewind. On Tuesday, you know this, Lay, I attended Mary Barra's fireside chat in Detroit. And I was told that she has this every year for media, with the exception of, I think, COVID, a couple years during COVID. I didn't attend last year, but I attended this year. And she is a total pro. She did not, what's the right way to say this?
Very diplomatic.
She did not she did not diverge from, I think, the narrative and the bullet points that she was told to kind of continue to communicate.
Yeah.
She said that the GM's going to follow the customer when it comes to EVs. They're going to try to fulfill the demands of the customer. They still plan on being all electric by 2035. She did not tell us what the LFP strategy for General Motors is, but they alluded to the fact this week that they said many of their EVs will be eligible for those tax credits. I don't know how to reconcile that. I just don't know. I know they're building capacity in the United States, but for 2024, I don't know where the cells are going to be coming from in order for that to happen. But maybe they're only looking at NCM for 2024 and then transitioning to LFP as local capacity gets built out, in Kentucky, I think, for General Motors. And so she talked about Cruise, still very focused on Cruise. And then she pointed to Investor Day in March, where Mike Abbott is going to spend a lot of time on the software strategy.
Yeah.
Now, for those folks that don't follow GM very closely, GM has the Ultium platform, which is their modular electric vehicle platform that's used for every single electric vehicle for General Motors. It can be shortened, it can be extended, so it works for small crossovers, large SUVs. And their software system is called Ultify. So Mike will talk about Ultify a little bit. And I think if you read everything that's going on with GM, then you didn't really need to attend Mary's fireside chat because she didn't really disclose anything else. But it was good to see her talk, and she seems very positive, and good for her because over the last 2 months there hasn't been a ton of really great news coming out of GM. So
it's funny because I tweeted that picture of the original Bolt that was unveiled at CES 2016, which was the first time that I attended that event. And GM, she then had a keynote which unveiled the Bolt. And she's basically, at that event was saying that we as the legacy or the traditional, we're going to drive the change. We're going to change the industry. But 7-8 years later, that kind of hasn't happened yet.
One other thing that I will mention was that because I asked her a 2-part question. I asked her about, she had mentioned during her 15-minute it wasn't a presentation, it was just kind of like an overview. So she just stood up on stage and just kind of summarized the year. And she had mentioned that the Ultium modules had production challenges. And so I raised my hand and asked her, can you be more specific about that? And she just said that there was an aggressive ramp and there weren't enough components to support this ramp. They were chasing parts effectively. So she said an aggressive ramp 2 or 3 times, or so they just weren't prepared. And she said that should be all resolved by the end of Q1 2024. So there should be a much higher supply of General Motors EVs starting in Q1, Q2 of 2024, hopefully. So anyways, that's kind of all I had, man. Did you have anything else yourself?
No. Just starting from 2024. The selection here in the US of the number of EVs that you can get full point of sale rebate, $7,500 rebate, still not that many. Not even Tesla, right? So for someone like you or let's say someone that's trying to pull the trigger, right? What do you do? Okay, well, I guess I do it this month, right? Even
Well, so my 13-year-old car is, knock on wood, has been working okay, and so I don't really want to have a third car. Let's just
yeah,
say that. And so if I can wait, I will.
I think I can probably also speak for many of the Americans owning a hybrid because I have a hybrid and it works right perfectly fine. I don't. I
Yeah.
mean, for the driving, the usage scenario.
And to your point, so there was a conference on Tuesday here in Michigan. John McElroy was one of the moderators for a discussion.
Right. You posted that the MPG comment, right?
Yeah. So, and since you brought up hybrids, he had mentioned during his monologue, stop calling it a hybrid, just call it a car that gets 50 miles to the gallon. And there goes your hybrid because of the politicization of clean energy vehicles. And he's absolutely right because, I bumped into him on Tuesday as well. And so we got a chance to talk. And he's a little bit skeptical about a few things, but yeah, I never thought of it like that, but when I read that comment, it just made a ton of sense, and that's why I tweeted it. But hold on a second here. NIO Chicago posted that Sixt, which is Germany's Hertz, is going to dump Teslas. No surprises there. I think that was mentioned a while ago. And we should also note the last thing that I'll bring up before we open it up. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hands. The one thing that I did want to say is get your thoughts on, have you heard anything about Tesla getting approvals to increase capacity or complete phase 3 of Shanghai Giga? I have not heard anything yet.
Matter of time.
But there was an article.
Yes, on the late post.
Yes. So if we're to believe that there's currently about 1 to 1.2 million units of capacity at Shanghai Giga, and it's not a supply problem currently in China, it's a demand problem. So the last thing they would need to do, unless they have a vehicle or vehicles ready to launch in the China market, would be to double capacity of Shanghai Giga. So I'm going to just say this. If it's confirmed that they are adding capacity to phase 3, then I would say within 18 months of that announcement, there's going to be a Model 2 that'll be rolling off the line in Shanghai Giga.
And I think Elon has hinted quite a few times of the cost of that. I guess it's based on the next platform or something, 50% lower. So I think $25,000 is just what it's to be known as. But I'm wondering, how much lower they can get the starting price of the next Tesla model in China. I mean, how much lower that could be, comparing that with the Volkswagen's coming CMP platform for China. That's what, 18,000.
You're putting a lot of faith into what Volkswagen is saying, because they haven't been able to fulfill any of the things that they've said.
That's why.
And if we're talking Model 2, I think the main pathway to reducing costs of the Model 2 is kind of getting that single piece chassis for front and rear. Because I think right now the Model 3 and the Model Y made in China have a single piece rear, which is reducing costs substantially. I think it takes out 60, 70, 80 parts from the rear, and they're trying to do that to the front chassis as well. And so that it would be like a module to pack, where there's a single piece front chassis, single piece rear chassis, and then a single piece module pack that combines the two and creates the rigidity for the vehicle.
So if we look into the crystal ball a little bit, could it be a lull in 2024 before another takeoff in 2025? I'm just, thinking, because of the next generation of these lower models that won't come out until then. I don't know. I'm just, thinking.
I don't see a clear path to no mas from anyone on the price war, because and my assumption is that the Chinese economy will continue to struggle through much of 2024.
And also part of the reason is because of that 30,000 RMB cap on the purchase tax exemption. That's, I think, valid until, is it next year? And then the two following years are 15,000 RMB, right? Gets cut in half. So these are, factors that'll play into the sales market psych.
And the last thing I'll point to, Lei, because you had mentioned a 40% take rate for November. If that holds, remember that Volkswagen during the ICE days was selling about 4 million cars a year. Now, proportionally, if they lose 40% of their sales, they've lost a substantial amount of sales on the ICE side. But if they lose 40%, that is what? 1.6 million vehicles. That's like 2 or 3, 4 factories worth of sales. So these companies on the ICE side, the legacies specifically, because let's not even talk about the SOEs because they manage somehow, right? But the foreign automakers that are still building or relying on ICE sales, they're going to continue to hurt in 2024 in a bad way as we creep into the mid 40s, the high 40s, the 50% into 2024. So just keep that in the back of your minds because Volkswagen announced, since we're talking about them, Volkswagen also announced Horizon, which is the weirdest, stupidest name. But anyway,
Horizon?
It's the joint venture between Horizon and Cariat. They called it Horizon.
Horizon?
So yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, no questions, so I'm good to go.
Same here.
Everyone, we will in the next week or two probably have our year-end review, and then I believe you and I talked about first episode for January 2024 would be our crystal ball look into 2024, Lei, I think. So appreciate everyone joining. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We will talk with you soon.
Talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Oh, hold on. Somebody just posted something else. From tax and EV credit incentive perspective, doesn't it make sense to separate the battery and car financially? Why aren't more companies doing this on paper? Not saying they need to have swap station infrastructure like NIO.
Well, I don't know. I mean, unless you have this BAS model, I don't know whether that works. That's my initial thought.
So NIO Chicago in the US, they do separate it because you get a tax credit as the consumer. And then if you're buying components and battery and rare earth and it's being manufactured by an ally or in country in the United States, I think you get $35 a watt hour, isn't it? Isn't that right?
I don't remember it on top of my head. Yeah.
But that goes to the manufacturer. It doesn't go to the consumer. So they do separate it. The U.S. government separated it in the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, if you're referring to China,
it's not the same, right?
Well, it's not the same. And China has really, really invested heavily already into the growth of the EV and battery sectors. We're seeing the result of that with a 40% take rate. So I just don't know how much more funding they're going to plow into growing the EV and battery sectors in China. So
yeah,
cool. Hey, thanks again, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.